All right, so I'm doing a standby. I'm going to mute myself.
Emil, can you hear us? Yeah, here you are.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I don't know. I've been having this problem a couple of times. Sorry. So, are we ready to start?
Yes, I think everybody's here.
Okay, then. Welcome to everybody on this webinar. To start this webinar, I will invite Hans Herren to give some introductory remarks. Hans doesn't need any introduction as president of the Biovision Foundation, the Millennium Institute, and numerous awards. So Hans, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Emil. Good morning, good afternoon to all the participants. It's quite a pleasure to be able to open this webinar, a very important one, by the way, given what is happening right now in terms of transformation of our food systems. I'm going to give you just a brief history of how we came up to this money flow report, and to discuss more details about the powers and the money flows, which are so basic to the transformation of our food systems. So just to go back a little bit about the money flow studies, which Biovision Foundation, IPES-Food, and ISD undertook, goes back to a report from IPES-Food, from uniformity to diversity. And actually, Emil was sort of the main author of this, the coordinator of this report. And when we wrote this, it was quite interesting to note, one of the graphics, which was quite striking, how power stands in the middle of the blockages to the transformation of the food system towards agroecology. And when we started thinking about, power, what is this power? And it ended up, what is power? Is money, right? We know that. And so we thought, why don't we start to understand more about the money flows and how they affect, positively or negatively, the transformation of the food system. And we know that if we want to facilitate this transformation, we need to understand what are the powers in place, what is actually happening out there. And we knew already way back, and the AG report, the IASTD report, now 11 years ago, already analyzed sort of what kind of investment come from where in different places, like Africa, Europe, US, Asia, Latin America. It was clear that there was a major shift from the funding from governments, which would be public money to create public goods in agriculture and food system research and implementation. There was this shift toward the private sector. The governments were more than ready to abdicate their role in financing and research and also implementation, extension to the private sector. And this was not happening just like this. The World Bank was very much actually proposing this, was behind it. as well as other actors in the system. Sure, if you think about it, and who was pushing this is also the private sector lobby, who, by the way, here in the US is bigger than the military lobby in Washington. So just show you the tremendous power, and it's not much different actually in the EU in Brussels, where the ag lobby, because there's so much money involved, is very, very strong. So we needed to analyze a bit better what's going on. And Biovision with IPES-Food looked into this, got some funding to look at a case study in Kenya and Switzerland. So these looking at these two foundation and the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, which is spending a lot of money in supporting agriculture, research, extension, support to farmers across Africa. And the Swiss government, Biovision in Switzerland, we have good access to data and to the people who are at SDC, the Swiss Government Corporation. And that actually showed the results of this report, which will be talked about also, how countries can influence what's going on, and also how private sector philanthropy can change or not what is going on. And it's quite interesting, the results of this study. This study added some work to other studies which had been done at the same time and before, both in the US and the UK, at Coventry, for example, Michel Pimbert. And what's interesting also is that it inspired a number of new reports, which you will hear about today, and I will hear also about them and learn more about what is actually going on and how is it that we are in the situation we are right now, where we have this strong pushback. We get a lot of headwind from the private sector towards the transformation of our food system toward agroecology. And again, understanding, who is behind, who funds this, will allow the public, I think, to change the way things are happening, the way we do the investment, who makes investments, how much investments go into agriculture and the food system. And I think that's absolutely essential if we want to do something. And that's not minor, because we have coming the Food System Summit with all the discussion around it. And again, I think if we know who is behind there, again, another example of private sector philanthropy, someone pushing for an agenda which is not necessarily the agenda of the people, of what is really needed out there in terms of food system. And like I like to say, to conclude, is that food is a human right. And I think that government need to take up their responsibility to fund it, to fund the research, to fund the implementation. You cannot leave that in the hand of the private sector, which again has a role to play, but it cannot play, the main fiddle. I think it should be following what governments and the people in these countries want. So I wish you a very great webinar, yet another one, I guess. But I think this is a very important one. I really look forward to listening to the speakers, the panelists of this meeting. So, Emil, thanks so much, and I'll pass the word to you again.
Thank you very much, Hans. Before we go into the studies, we'll have a keynote introduction that will be given by Shalmali Guttal. Shalmali is the Executive Director of Focus on the Global South. And without further ado, I give the floor to Shalmali.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the organizers of this event for inviting me. Okay, what I've done is that I sent some photographs of the kind of work we are doing in the field and regionally on agroecology and food sovereignty. And I think Matthias is going to run them in the background as I share my views with you. I hope that's okay. Can you all hear me all right? Am I coming through clearly?
Yes, you're coming through well.
Okay.
I will give you a signal a couple of minutes before the end of your time so that we'll stay within overall timing.
And how
Go
much
ahead.
time do I have?
12
15
to
minutes?
15 minutes.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So good evening again. Again, I thank all the organizers of this event for inviting me to share my views. So since our time is limited, I will get right to the substance of my talk. Now, over the past several decades, because of the environmental, climate, energy, economic, and food crises, debates about the sustainability of the dominant forms of resource use, production, and consumption have taken center stage in intergovernmental organizations concerned with climate change, food and agriculture, governance, and the environment. The negative environmental, health, and economic consequences of the industrial food system have become just too blatantly visible to ignore. And so there is a growing consensus internationally, an agreement that deep significant change is needed, and that sustainable agriculture has been presented as a broad collection of strategies to bring about this change. Now, included in this collection of strategies of sustainable agriculture is agroecology, but so also are sustainable intensification, climate smart agriculture, industrial production of organic foods, and others. In fact, some even argue that blue economy and green economy are part of sustainable agriculture. Now, sustainable intensification, I think, as many of you know, can just about include anything that increases yields but maintains some environmental outcomes. Now, agroecology is very different from these. It started to increasingly figure in the popular imagination because of strong advocacy from small-scale food producers movements, from civil society organizations, agroecologists, and academics. Now, today, many multilateral institutions, governments, research centers, NGOs, and even corporations recognize agroecology. And as Hans pointed out, they are saying that they are now, especially governments and philanthropic foundations, claim that they're funding agroecology. Now, in the following sessions, research will be presented on the quantity and nature and quality of the financing, so I won't go into those issues. What I would like to do is present the key aspects and elements of agroecology as a system and the conditions that enable agroecology, as well as the positive changes that agroecology would lead to, so that agroecology advocates and funders can assess whether these funds and these efforts are actually advancing agroecology as a system, or are they just patching these so-called sustainability gaps, but leaving the larger dysfunctional agri-food system more or less intact. And as Hans Herren has already pointed out, the power of money is indeed immense, both in the front and operating from the back. So we have to think carefully and see really what the impacts of the financing towards agroecology is doing. Now, agroecology is, according to many agroecologists and researchers, myself included, it's at the same time a science, a set of practices, but also, most important, a social movement for ecological, social, and multi-generational justice. Agroecology is a political process. Now, this may make funders nervous, but they need to understand that agroecology is not about creating markets of organic products grown through contract farming arrangements in the same industrial models, which can be then displayed alongside industrially produced products so that consumers can have a choice. This choice issue comes up a lot. Instead, agroecology is about deep systemic transformation of our economic and social systems in the face of deepening climate change and what looks like an era of recurring epidemics and pandemics. It is integral to an urgent paradigm shift that we must make from overproduction, overconsumption, and the destruction that these types of models create. We need to make the paradigm shift from that to living, producing, and consuming within our planet's carrying capacity, and also aligning ourselves with nature and earth systems rather than trying to dominate them. Now, over the past 10 to 15 years, many practitioners, supporters, agroecologists, social movements, and advocates have been meeting in different parts of the world to build a common understanding of agroecology. They've been drawing from diverse and contextually rooted knowledges and practices in their respective territories and in social, economic, environmental, and climatic conditions. And I think it would do us well, serve us well here to see what are the common pillars and principles that have emerged through these gatherings. These are encapsulated very well in a 2015 declaration from an international meeting of agroecologist social movements in Nyaleni in Mali in 2015. But I've also drawn from principles from other sources. Let me start with on these principles with a quote from the Nyaleni Declaration of 2015, which is that agroecology is the answer of how to transform and repair our material reality in a food system and rural world that has been devastated by industrial food production and so-called green and blue revolutions. We see agroecology as a key form of resistance to an economic system that puts profit before life. So it is very clear that from the social movement, grassroots agroecology's points of view, agroecology is a systemic, transformational, positive, strategy. At the same time, a system of resistance to continuing corporate exploitation and destruction. Now, going through some of the principles, the key ones, agroecology is a way of life. Agroecologists and social movements call it the language of nature. It highlights the equilibrium between nature and human beings. Humans are a part of nature and a part of the web of life. No form of life should be or can be commodified. So then to try to dominate nature it goes antithetical to agroecology. Next, agroecology is not a set of technologies or production methods only that can be applied in the same way everywhere. Rather, agroecology is based on principles that are translated into practice on particular conditions of the territories of practice. And these territories of practice is extremely important because it talks about contextual knowledge, diversity, adaptability, and innovation. All of these are key. The production practices of agroecology, these are not little bits of glue that we use to patch sustainability gaps, but these are based on ecological principles, such as building life back into the soil, recycling nutrients, dynamic management of biodiversity, and energy conservation. There is no place for agrotoxic materials, artificial hormones, GMOs, or other dangerous technofixes. Territories are a fundamental pillar of agroecology. These include the physical, geographic attributes of land and water and vegetation, but equally the material and spiritual relationships that people and communities have to their lands. So a very important aspect of financing agroecology is supporting and providing full recognition for the tenure and governance systems, agency, autonomy, and self-determination of agroecological communities. Following from these, equally important are collective rights and access to commons. Agroecology enables and demands the sharing of commons and territories. It also enables the creation of commons and systems for regulating use and avoiding conflicts. Very important and central to agroecology is on-site conservation of agricultural and natural biodiversity. Includes seeds, animal breeds, traditional and indigenous plants, varieties, vegetation, all these which are extremely important for sustainable food systems and sustainable and healthy diets. Now, the research centers of agroecologists in the field are their fields, literally. Their research centers are their, and laboratories are their fields and their territories where they practice and they innovate, whether it's developing beans, rice, potatoes, chilies, just name it. And this is another reason why the issue of territorial integrity and right and access to territory and biodiversity are so central to agroecology. So no agroecology financing can proceed without that. Agroecology is developed through people's innovation, research, selection, and breeding. And these have to take place in sites that are conducive to knowledge and learning. Agroecology knowledge is built not in the same ways that other knowledges are necessarily built. These are diverse knowledges, they're diverse ways of knowing. They're built through dialogue, intergenerational, peer learning, popular education processes. Another extremely important aspect then of this kind, building this kind of learning and biodiversity, are collectivities and solidarity, autonomy and self-organization. Because these are very important to build local food systems and challenge corporate control of our food systems. Agroecology is not anti-market, but it challenges and displaces the control of global markets on food systems and on realizing the right, on realizing the right to food. It builds transparent relationships between producers and consumers, so consumers know from where, who, and how their food is coming. It's the sharing of risks and benefits of food production, which in turn then reduces debt burdens on small-scale food producers, which then reduces the power of risk insurance corporations. So agroecology is political in several ways. It's particularly political in that it requires us to challenge and transform structures of powers in society. It's very important to talk here about the recognition, respect, and value of the knowledge work and vision and leadership of women. Women have been at the forefront and at the centers of agroecological transformations. Their rights to resources, their rights and agency to decision-making, and full equality and agency are central to making agroecology work as a system. Similarly, agroecology is an extremely important space for youth, who together with women provide one of the two main principal bases for the evolution of agroecology. Youth are the channels of multi-generational knowledge sharing. They are the future innovators for sustainable and resilient food systems. Agroecology is a responsible employment system. It emphasizes the rights and safety of workers, formal or informal, migrant or not. So, as Hans Herren already said, agroecology is based on human rights. It's a companion to food sovereignty, agrarian reform, and human rights-based governance on land and territories. Now, tinkering with the global corporate food system is not going to help. It's not going to change the crisis and bring us out of the crises that we are in. The real solutions to the crises of climate and malnutrition will come from a complete systemic transformation, and agroecology offers various points of entry for beginning to transform that system. But these entry points must also support the structural, social, economic, and political conditions for genuine transformation, which in turn raises critical questions about how resources are allocated and their successes are evaluated. Who makes decisions about what, who to fund, how much and where, and under what conditions? How are systemic transformations monitored and assessed? Who are the central actors in monitoring and assessing them? I think it's extremely, important here to point out that there is a real danger that agroecology can be co-opted and is being co-opted, or is being incrementalized into bits and pieces here and there, as a way not towards transformation, but as a way to draw it into the paradigm of systemic, or not the paradigm, but rather the collection of sustainable intensification. And this is indeed, a dangerous trend, because unless the financing for agroecology actually seeks to, I'm looking at the chat. Unless the financing for agroecology actually seeks to address the systemic problems that have been created by industrial agriculture and by the industrial agri-food system, agroecology will be co-opted by corporations and by multilateral organizations and agencies that are financed by the agri-food system. So again, I put before you, when we are assessing how successful or not financing for agroecology is, it is important to take a look, and it is important to use the parameters of these principles and pillars of systemic change to assess where financing is going, how it's going, who's making decisions about them, who has autonomy in using these finances, and how agroecology is genuinely leading to and resulting in systemic transformation. Thank you, and I leave it there.
Thank you very much, Shalmali, for this very clear presentation, really highlighting the complexity of what we are dealing with, but also the pitfalls. And I think we will be hearing more about that. Thank you also for sticking to the time that was allocated to this. So I will just give a couple of minutes of introduction to the studies that will be presented to you in a minute. And if we can have the first slide, yes. I think in the last few years, there's been a very wide recognition in numerous major reports from IPES, from IPCC, from the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition, from the Soil Mission Board and for the Mission Board for Soil Health and Food, and others, that we need transformational change. As Shalmali very clearly exposed, we cannot just have some incremental changes, and I'll come back to that in a second. We must really have this transformation, and whether we start from underperforming subsistence agriculture or from unsustainable industrial agriculture, we must really transform the systems into diversified agroecological systems that are resilient and sustainable and equitable. So in the next slide, what we need is to move beyond incremental change. Again, as Shalmali mentioned, just increasing the efficiency or trying to overcome some of the pitfalls of industrial agriculture, or from just substituting some inputs by organic inputs, is not going to deliver what is needed to meet the numerous challenges. What we need is a real redesign, and that is about transformational change. We need a redesign of the agroecosystems that are based on ecological principles, on the way that nature works. And this can be defined by a set of elements of agroecology that are illustrated at the right. And what is important is that this is not a menu where you can just pick one or two and say, I'm doing agroecology. In the same way as doing just efficiency gains or input substitution is not agroecology. You need to be transformative, but also you need to address all of the elements of agroecology in all its dimensions, not just the practices, but also the other aspects, and move beyond the agroecosystem level, also into the food system level, by re-establishing connections between growers and eaters, and looking at the general question of sustainability and equity for all. Next. So the studies that we will be hearing more from are 6 in number, one from the UK, one from Belgium, one from Denmark, one at the European level, at the EU level, one from France and Switzerland. And what you can see already from this slide is that there is quite a variety of investments, but that in general, the investments are really very small. So we see that the funding flows contributing to agroecological transformation varies from 1% to about half of the investment in the case of Switzerland. That really stands out a bit as an exception. So without further ado, we will be hearing from the authors of these 6 reports, and these are Nina Müller, Associate Professor from the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience of the Coventry University. Then later on from François Grenade, from the Research and Advocacy Officer from Ile-de-Pays in Belgium, Margot Vermeulen, Independent Researcher, Matthias Geck, Program Manager at Biovision, and Valentin Brochard from CCFD Terre Solidaire. So with the first study from the UK, I will ask Nina, what did you find particularly alarming about your analysis of the UK development aid? Nina?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Emil. I already started answering. I didn't see that there was a double mute going on. So thanks for that question, which is very good. And I think I would like to say two things about this in this particular context. So particularly alarming was, of course, the non-existence of funding for agroecology in any meaningful sense of the term. What you see in the graph here as potentially agroecological are actually projects for which we didn't have enough data to make a decision. Nothing actually indicated that these projects would in fact be supportive of agroecology. And the other percentage that is here named agroecological is only so at Gleesman level 1, which refers to approaches, as we've heard from you just now, that improve efficiency of conventional agriculture, such as sustainable intensification, which I think cannot really be called agroecological at all. And this was really eloquently pointed out by Shalmali earlier. So we adopted a generous approach in this study, and probably too generous. There was really no funding at all for a transformative agroecology in the UK portfolio between 2010 and 2017. But there's another more important point, something more alarming that I would like to point to, and that was the lack of transparency of ODA data. This study was originally meant to analyze funding flows of several European countries, not just the UK. But we had to limit us to the UK because it was the only country for which comprehensive data was publicly available at a level of detail that would actually allow for a proper analysis. And even though it was available, we still spent weeks just getting the information into a searchable and comparable format. And so for all the talk of aid, transparency, and the various declarations, the various initiatives since the OECD's high-level forum in Paris in 2005, detailed aid data is still, in effect, difficult and hugely time-consuming to access. And therefore, of course, is more difficult than it should be to hold donors to account. And just to finish that reflection, my worry is that this lack of transparency isn't just an indication that donors are not publishing their data, but rather that they don't actually really have that data properly organized. And if they don't, then I worry that at the end of the day, donors themselves don't actually really know what they end up funding. And that was what was alarming about the study. Thanks a lot, Emil.
Thank you very much, Nina, for that very clear response. And I think this is showing that even the figure that we found already alarming is even more alarming. Let's move on now to François Grenade, who will be talking about the Belgian study. There, what we see on this graph is a more optimistic view of 16% of investments in agroecology, and even 45% potentially. I must say I'm a bit surprised knowing that the development policy of Belgium is not really supportive and barely mentions agroecology. So how can you explain that?
Yeah, hello Emil, hello everybody. So yeah, that's true. The study covers the period between 2013 and 2017, and indeed there were no political support or attention to agroecology at this time. What I want to say is that Belgian agricultural ODA is channeled in three different types of flows. The first one is governmental flows. It represents 20% of the budget. There are also multilateral flows representing more than half of the budget. And finally, non-governmental flows. That's Belgian funding NGOs, trade unions, and universities. And it represents almost one third of the budget, exactly 28% of the budget analyzed. And what we saw in the study is that there was quite impressive difference between these types of flows. Firstly, for governmental flows, only 7% supports agroecology. So that's not that much, and we have to say that the support is getting worse since then. We have a new, since 2017, we have a new agricultural strategy in Belgium, and it's prioritizing private sector and specific value chains. And there is also the removal of a specific fund dedicated to food insecurity, which performed better than the others. For multilateral flows, as I said, it's more than half of the budget analyzed. It's only 3% of the flows supporting agroecology. And the last flows, non-governmental flows, it's almost half of the budget supporting agroecology, exactly 48%. And I must mention that as NGOs, we funded the study, but it was made independently by Margot Vermeulen and Olivier de Scuter. So we didn't have a say on these numbers. Thus, the support for agroecology in Belgium is due to NGOs and finally to the relative respect by Belgium of the right of initiative and autonomy of NGOs. So without this support, the score would have been around 4%. So that's what explains the difference. And my last remark would be that there is change right now in Belgium. Sustainable food system is since 1 month recognized as a new priority of the new government of Belgium, and our bright new Minister of Development just announced that she will invest more in agroecology. So we have to check how it's going to be implemented, but the news are good right now in Belgium concerning the support to agroecology. Okay, back to you.
Thank you, Francois, and thank you for ending up on a more positive note, because it was not very encouraging to see that it's despite the Belgian policy that investment was going, and thanks to the initiatives of civil society organizations. So let's move on now to Denmark, and I will ask Margot Vermeulen to answer this question about how come that Denmark, that is in general perceived to be quite progressive in its domestic policies, promoting organic agriculture and agroecology, how come that this is not translated in its ODA?
Hi, everyone. First of all, it should be specified that this intervention reflects my personal analysis as a researcher and does not engage the responsibility of DCA, who founded the study. Coming back to the question, one of the main reasons why so little agroecology is found in Danish bilateral public assistance, as you said, only 1%, is to be found within the current framework of Danish humanitarian and development cooperation policy. Indeed, in January 2017, Denmark adopted a new strategy titled The World 2030, and the document defines 4 strategic objectives. First, safety, peace, and protection. Second, prevention of irregular migration. Third, inclusive, sustainable growth. And 4, freedom, democracy, human rights, and equality. The first 2 main priorities ultimately focus on reducing the number of migrants coming to Denmark, and this partially reflects the country's increasing tendency to record its expenditure on asylum seekers in Denmark as development assistance. Then the third priority, which is inclusive sustainable growth, specifies that it will also benefit Danish economy, trade, and investment. Finally, although the 4th priority includes human rights, the right to food is not one of them. The strategy makes no mentions of food security or food sovereignty, with the result that a large part of Danida's agricultural projects focus on cash crops and exports. Additionally, there is no mention of smallholders, and the strategy focuses mainly on the private sector. Based on this observation, about the strategy of Denmark, it can be said that Denmark's lack of investment in agroecology in its official development assistance actually reflects the country's current domestic political and economic priorities. This was my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. We will now move on to the EU study and come back to Nina, who was also leading this study. When we see that 80% of these projects are not supportive of agroecology, what are these projects actually?
Thank you again, Emile. Thank you for that question. So first of all, I would also like to say that it's really important to understand that this study was based on a portfolio of projects that from the EU budget to the Rome-based agencies, to the FAO, IFAD, and the World Food Programme. I just want to underline that because it doesn't reflect the whole of the EU development assistance. So almost 50% of the total funding flows analyzed either promote conventional agricultural practices or, and that's actually more often, they promote the wider agricultural sector in beneficiary countries. They strengthen that sector. For example, through the establishment or the improvement of information systems or early warning systems with respect to weather and food security, or for example, also through infrastructural works, such as access roads or irrigation infrastructure, including dams. But about 30% of the money flows we looked at are aimed at efficiency-oriented improvements to conventional agriculture, such as sustainable intensification. And that would make up those 80%. I would like to add that while we did not find any explicit donations for such things as tractors or fertilizers, the overall emphasis was firmly on embedding sustainable intensification approaches and on funding a sector that is geared towards large-scale agribusiness. Given that there is a huge private investment power behind these businesses, to me it's really sad to see public finance doing little else than bolstering and opening opportunities for business as usual. There are indications that this may change at the EU level with a stronger, more explicit focus on agroecology since the Green Deal. But how transformative these future disbursements and these future implementation of projects will be remains to be seen. And that's all I really have to say to this. Thanks, Emile.
Thank you, Nina. I think it is important to highlight again that this is not reflecting the entire portfolio of the European Commission's investment in ODA, but specifically the money that flows to the Rome-based agencies, which is only, of course, a part of that investment. Let's move on to the next study in France. I would like to ask Valentin, who did this study, why you have included non-ODA data in your study.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So basically, in the French case study, just first let me say that we produced this study jointly with Oxfam France and Action Against Hunger. So in the French case study, we decided to go beyond the official ADA to reflect what we see as a double speak of the French government regarding its contribution toward agriculture. Basically, what we see is that on the one hand, our government seems super friendly to agroecology. In France, we have, for instance, official strategies, commitments, and even laws in favor of agroecological transition in developing countries. And on the other hand, we as NGOs, we continuously receive news and alert from our partner on the ground regarding French growing agro-industrial investments. So basically what we did regarding this study is that we did study 10 years of French bilateral flows that went to countries that was eligible to ODA. That means that we included data from institutions that are outside of the sole scope of ODA. For instance, we included data from the French Public Bank of Investment that gives credit export to French agricultural companies that want to invest in developing countries. So therefore, being based on a methodology that differ little from the other case studies, I think I need to precise that the results that we showcase here need to be taken with a little precaution. That being said, what we see on this graph is still interesting, outside of the fact that we couldn't identify the meaning of 30% of the French fundings. We are able to claim that nearly 24% of the French agricultural investments that went to developing countries were in support of non-agroecological investment and practices, while only 13 were in favor of a real agroecological transition. And I would like to add here that we developed a specific methodology to classify those non-agroecological investments, and that the majority of them are agro-industrial investments. Regarding those 24%, we are thus not speaking about investment that doesn't take agroecology into account. We are speaking about investment that mostly specifically goes against the very core principle of an agroecological transition. So I would like to share two key findings regarding those non-agroecological investments. First, they are mainly the result of two French institutions, namely Proparco and BPI France, that heavily funds this practice. The French Development Agency, for instance, doesn't support that much agro-industry. Those kind of funding are nearly inexistent in the time frames that we studied. Secondly, those non-agroecological investments, they seems to be dissociated from the country needs and demand. For instance, between 2009 and 2018, Cuba received the vast majority of the French agro-industrial investments, while Cuba being at this time one of the main champions of agroecology at international level. So there is a clear lack of articulation between what the donors funds and what the study need and ask. I won't go any further regarding the details of this report because the report is not out yet. It will be out in January, and we committed to discuss those results with the French government beforehand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentin. We will now move on to the next study from Switzerland, and I invite Matthias Geg to tell us a bit more about that, and what did you find particularly surprising in that study? Matthias?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Emil. I hope you can hear me, and now that I've turned on my video again, the connection doesn't.
You are breaking up.
So you cannot hear me well?
You were breaking up, but now it seems okay.
I've stopped the video. Maybe that makes it better. Does
okay.
It? Okay, yeah, the same thing happened before. When I start the video, the connection goes weak. My apologies for that. So thanks a lot for your questions, because there is strong political commitment to agroecology. This notwithstanding, the very positive results came as a bit of a surprise to us. Over half of the analyzed projects reached at least level 3 of food system change. This shows that when there is strong political will to support agroecology, change is indeed possible. However, really transformative, transdisciplinary and systemic projects are a rare exception also in the Swiss case. In way too many cases, just individual components of agroecology are addressed in isolation and not through a really transformative, holistic approach. But the really negative surprise that struck us was when we looked at where the money actually goes. I have to remind you, we were looking at funds dedicated specifically to supporting agricultural development in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet the vast majority of the projects that we looked at were led by either Swiss or international institutes. Just a very small percentage were actually led by institutes based in sub-Saharan Africa. This is not only regrettable from an ownership perspective, so to speak, and an empowerment perspective, but also from a food system change perspective, because it was exactly these African-led projects that performed by far the best in our assessment. They combined agroecological farming practices on field to landscape level with the socioeconomic, cultural, and political dimensions of food system change, and therefore really make transformative agroecology possible. That's all I'm going to say for now. Please do have a look at our full money flows report, which of course has a lot more details on this case study as well as others. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matthias. So what we've seen from these 6 studies is that overall, there is still relatively little investment in agroecology, and that some of the things that are labeled as agroecology are not always really transformative. I think some of the assessments that have been made are probably a little bit generous from that point of view. So there's still a long way to go. I will now move on to a next section in this webinar, where we will hear from 2 studies that have been done recently, one by IDS and one by the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry. And the first one will be presented by Imogen from IDS. And she will be talking about the enabling factors for financing a transformative change and some of the big picture questions. So Imogen, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Emil, and thanks everybody. I'll be talking about the political economy analysis that was done as part of the Money Flows report. And as the report title says, this is about what's holding back investment in agroecological research for Africa. But the results I'll talk about are relevant to agriculture more widely and more globally. The slide that you can see on the screen now was presented in the political economy chapter of the report. And I'm going to start off by talking about the parts on the right-hand side of the diagram, which are labeled openings. These were identified as opportunity points for financing a transformation to agroecology. And then I'm going to turn back to talking about some of the factors on the left-hand side of the diagram, which shape the system. And these connect to the big pictures and the big questions and the challenges that emerged. So to have a look at the so-called openings on the right-hand side of the diagram, we identified 3 points at which changes in the direction of a science system can be made. And these changes could be towards agroecology. Firstly, we looked at crises, into the space of which new ideas such as agroecology can be promoted as solutions. And then consensus statements such as the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, which just serve to indicate that a certain issue has been picked up as an important global issue. And then thirdly, at an institutional level, conscious moments of internal strategy review, for example, by donor organizations. All of these can be opportunities for change, but they need some kind of stimulus to suggest the actual direction of change. So the next question is, what can encourage change in an agroecological direction in these where these like openings occur? So I'll talk about 2 things, one more radical and one more reformist. Firstly, the work suggested the importance of key individuals and their networks in taking risky actions to push change in unconventional directions. For example, through suggesting novel ideas to funders, which might be through normal funding mechanisms like calls for proposals, or in a more unsolicited way. And in the research context that we focused on here, this included work that's truly academically interdisciplinary, or that's from disciplines that aren't normally associated with agriculture or with quantitative indicators, for example, the arts or humanities. Secondly, there is room for a more reformist approach, which I think we could call a more shallow approach, where people who are committed to agroecological change of some type would seek entry points which represent some common ground with existing paradigms of agricultural development or existing interest coalitions. And here, researchers, funders, and others can explore crossovers between a strong agroecology, which would consider fully the political, the environmental, and the cultural dimensions of agriculture, and the imperatives of more conventional agriculture. For example, the idea of resource efficiency proved to be a very easy and uncontentious entry point, which is common to most mainstream agricultural development paradigms and also to the ideals of agroecology. And other similar easy entry points, if you like, are broadly environmental sustainability or gender equity. Now, these radical and reformist approaches can happen at the same time, although without the more radical approach, the reformist or shallow approach to agroecology will not lead to an agroecological transformation, rather to a kind of co-option that I think the following speakers will talk about in more depth and has already been mentioned today. But both of those approaches to agroecological change involve dialogue between funders and between ground level actors, which in the context of the Money Flows report largely refers to researchers and of course to farmers. I want to look at the left-hand side of the diagram now to think a little bit about the big picture that's kind of shaping and framing this agricultural system and agricultural research system. And actually, what I'm going to say echoes what has been heard throughout the first half of this webinar. What I want to focus on here is about how far profit-making imperatives dominate not just the agricultural system, but the agricultural research system. Most agricultural conventional research and development paradigms would argue that farmers are or should be profit maximizers, so part of the private sector. And this is a really strong discourse in African agricultural development currently, in particular. But in contrast, more anthropological or maybe systems-based understandings of agriculture would focus on profit optimization, or more likely risk reduction. But the profit maximization narrative does tend to prevail, and this is largely because the coalition of actors that dominate agricultural research for development currently are embedded in the paradigm where success is measured predominantly by yield as the key metric. And I think agronomy and economics are really good examples of academic disciplines that embody this paradigm. Money Flow report found the mechanisms of institutional and professional self-reinforcement for organizations and the individuals that work within them act as lock-ins and discourage the more drastic and radical changes away from these yield and profit-focused paradigms. And this often includes an element of ideological commitment to those ideals. And we pointed out strongly that this is reinforced by, although among other things, really close relations with larger scale private sector actors and mostly through public-private partnerships, particularly in the context that we were studying here. So, I'll conclude by saying that genuinely opening up to agroecology has got to imply explicitly discussing, if not problematizing, the role of the private sector at different scales in the agricultural realm, and discussing the relevance of productivity and profit orientations alongside other aspects and metrics of human and ecological well-being. And more seriously, it will involve problematizing the power that's held by private corporations in the agricultural research, development, and policy spheres. Thanks very much, Emil.
Thank you very much, Imogen. And without further ado, I will now pass on to the second study that will be presented by Colin Anderson and also Faris. So Faris Ahmed, who will be starting?
Thank you, Emil. Yes, so this study was more about the qualitative aspect, and we talked to about 20 donors and beneficiaries, and the research by CORE was supported by SIDSE, and I worked with the team of Colin, Nina, Francois. And while we call this research theme financing agroecology, it's important to recognize that smallholder farmers really are the ones who resource agroecology, not only with their financial resources, but also with their knowledge, their labor, their love, their cultural and spiritual connections to the land. And it's their movements that are really driving the transformational imperative, if you like, of agroecology. So this study on the second part of this work, on the perspectives of how financing can catalyze a more transformative agroecology isn't out yet, so you're getting a scoop. But we have 2 slides here. I'm going to present the first slide on financing a transformative agroecology. What does it entail? And some of the key enabling factors we found, and some are specific and immediate, and others are social, cultural, and finally there's some big picture political ones that Colin is going to talk about. So 5 things. First, specific funding modalities, for example, long-term timelines. We heard from some donors that their timelines are 10 years. Flexibility in funding, for example, COVID-inspired creative and flexible funding arrangements that were made just this year. Some donors we spoke to have decades-long relationships of solidarity and mutual accountability. We often talk about accountability to donors, but it's important to think about accountability to the communities that are actually benefiting. Second, funding territorial approaches. As Shalmali pointed out very eloquently, territory comprises land, water, seeds, ecosystems, animals, people. So it's political, it's ecological, and it's social, cultural in its dimensions. And this is seen by many as the most appropriate and strategic sphere of transformation, not a sector by sector funding approach, not just to agriculture or health and so on, but really transdisciplinary and intersectoral. The third, funding can be transformative if it enhances sovereignty and agency in agroecological transitions. In our research, we encountered many examples of communities participating in governance structures, in solidarity funds that they co-managed, managing grants to their peers, and building communities of practice. So those are really building up the agency and facilitating that. And also enrolling or engaging others in your peer community. For example, people who are enthusiastic about the impact of engaging local government officials using propositional approaches. So not fighting against pesticides, for example, but working towards something that you have a common mandate for. That is improving ecosystems through agroecology. Foundations that we spoke to, some spoke about engaging their peer and their institutions to leverage public funds through private, urging their bilateral counterparts, for example, to up their funding and to activate their endowments for financial transformation. Often foundations are sitting on large endowments that are untouched. So in certain times to activate those endowments as well. And the last point, knowing progress, understanding the transformative pathways means developing sophisticated and transdisciplinary measurement tools, also monitoring and evaluation tools and indicators that take the long view of what it takes to change the system. And with that, I'll pass over to Colin for the next slide.
Thank you, Faris. Colin?
Great. Thank you, Emil. So as we spoke with donors and recipients, we also heard a lot of concerns and challenges that have already, many of which have been gestured towards or directly addressed by other people who've contributed on this panel already. But talking about some of the big picture issues, and that while we want to think about how to move money towards agroecology and how to do that better, what we also need to think about is kind of that broader context that's been painted and all the challenges that are created through the political economic systems and the funding that is allocated to industrial agriculture, and that if we don't mind that, then funding projects on the ground and funding through all the modalities that Faris mentioned, you're working against the stream. So people talked about the challenges they're seeing around the funding of shallow agroecology and the co-optation. I see it's mentioned in the chat already. And again, this idea that if we're talking about transformation and agroecology transformations, we need to think beyond just funding projects, but to fund work that addresses that broader context. And so people talked a lot about the need for the support for political work, the political work of social movements, and bringing farmers, food producers, indigenous peoples, enabling them to, or providing resources for work that addresses that bigger picture. And then there was a lot around this, and often we were asking people to speak directly to funding modalities and things like that. People kept coming back to this bigger picture thing. So there's quite a lot of points that could be made around this, but a couple more that I'll just quickly make are, people talked about how there's a danger that agroecology, once it gets raised or brought into like a development paradigm, it becomes a part of the development machine and could become a cookie cutter approach that reproduces colonial and oppressive relationships, where the priorities of donors and actors in the global north are kind of being becoming to dominate in funding programs for agroecology. There's a number of dimensions to that people raised. And so, I mean, there's a lot that this implies and a lot of work to be done, and a lot of it is big work. And a lot of that is addressing some of the deep material, systematic, economic, political work, but it implies a transformation of professional culture. So people who are working in research institutes, in NGOs, in donor organizations, to reimagine their role in development, to reimagine the role of scientists, the role of donor professionals, to embrace the kind of approach to knowledge and agency and autonomy that have been raised in Shalmali's presentation, but also the kind of a lot of the work that's, again, represented across the different contributions that have been made as in the context of the different contributions of the studies that have been presented here. So with that, I'll pause. I'm looking forward to hearing from the respondents and panelists to see, how this how all this sits with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colin. With these presentations, we will now move on to a panel discussion, and I will first introduce the panelists. We have 3 panelists coming from more what I would say the recipient side, the actors on the ground. The first one is Mamadou Goita, who is the director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternative Development, IRPAD. He's also a member of IPES-Food. The second speaker is Joshua Aijuka. He's from Pelum, Uganda. And the third one is Janet Maro, Executive Director of Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania. So with those, there are also 2 donors. We were expecting 3, but one could not join us because of health reasons. The first one is Christophe Larose, who is the head of a sector on sustainable agriculture at DEFCO, at the European Commission. And also Christina Blank, who's program officer in the global program Food Security at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. So my first comment is really, how can we, after having heard the gaps in funding for agroecology in the 6 case studies, and after having heard about innovations and approaches that are being viewed as transformative from the 2 other studies, from your perspective as civil society organizations and working on the ground, from your perspective as producers and social movements, what do you see as emerging opportunities to see a shift towards agroecology from your perspective? And I will start with Mamadou.
Thank you, Emile. I'm really sorry because I joined. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm really sorry because I'm not in my office and on my way. So I just have to stay in another office and do this.
You are on time, no worry.
I came a bit late, so I didn't hear the first presentation. Just very quickly, just to say that I was very happy looking at all these figures that show, the amount of work that we have to do to change the trends of funding for agroecology at different levels. Now, this is first in your own continent, but also mainly in Africa. Because if we want to go in the perspective of a transformative agriculture on ecological perspective, there is a lot to do. First thing that I realized is that this issue of transparency in the funding system is very problematic. And some of the key things has been mentioned, and then our feeling here in the case of West Africa globally, but also in my country, Mali, is that there is a big gap between the objective that we are aiming to and the kind of funding that is on our way. First, very short term, even within the project, I'm not surprised about the amount, so I won't talk about them. But even the small amount that are sometimes given and supporting agroecology is used in a very bad way. Why? First, please, first, because the first thing is that the terms of this project, they are very competitive projects. First, then those who need this funding are not accessing to it. Secondly, that the segment of agroecology that people are supporting is not where these resources should be put in many cases. And thirdly, they are based on the project perspective, while the transformative aspect of agroecology is a long-term process. So we need to ensure that supporting upstream and downstream steps of agroecology is to allow just very flexible systems of funding. Secondly, thirdly, just to allow that to go where this money should go to support, but in a structural way, this transformation, not a conjunctural way. And thirdly, that is also very important, that to break this cycle that we are in between the interference between bilateral and multilateral corporations and companies and corporations. So the need of companies, corporations in different segments of the agroecological perspective. So we are experiencing the same thing, that people will support like organic production system as a niche to allow feeding their own market, or to allow feeding their own companies as a niche. And for us, agroecology is not a niche, it's a way of life. It's a way of transforming a whole life of people, a whole life of a continent, a whole life of a territory that couldn't be developed with this kind of funding system. So if you bring that on the table, we see that there is a lot to go. And how to go out of that, this is just, the first step is what we are doing actually. These figures, these researches are allowing us to have a clear picture of where the money is going first, and secondly, how it proceeds, and which segment of transformation is taken into account. So we need to do that research, and then collectively to work in changing policies, but also practices that are going on in this institution, mainly European Union, but also other donor communities. And to say that this, we need to change our paradigm of understanding what agroecology is about. It's not a conjunctural thing, it's a structural transformation that we need to operate. And for that sake, we need to really collectively to change the way that we are funding. So it's a reform, and this reform should start with different policies, but also how these alliances is built between corporations and bilateral and multilateral cooperation should stop. So I will just start by saying that we need to change our way of operating. We need to create alliances and work on changing the trajectories of a funding system. Amount, time, allocation, time allocated for that project measure will never develop our agricultural system in our country. 2 years, 3 years project is nonsense. It's creating a lot of corruption. It's creating a lot of frustration, and mainly women and youth who need some transformation in that case are completely left aside because time is so quick to get out of the project that it's a problem for them to access to it. So this is what I will say, and then saying that we are not really sincere. I will take honestly that we are not sincere in the funding of agroecological perspective in our continent, because if we want to be sincere, we need to know that there are many structural changes that need to be operated in terms of amount, time, and where we are putting these resources. So I will stop here to allow others to come in, and if there is time, I can come back again to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou. I just want to lift one point that you mentioned, which I think is extremely important. It's not just on which type of agriculture that the funding is being allocated, but we have to transform the way that we envisage support for agricultural development away from a short-term project basis towards a more strategic long-term and, as you say, structural investments. So I will now invite Janet Marrow from Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania to make her comments. Janet.
Thank you, Emil. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Let me put my video. Hope it works. Yes.
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Good, good. Okay, now I have to put my screen, but it's not checking. Okay, super. Yes, thank you so much. It's a great honor to be able to also contribute a bit from this end on agroecology and funding. So from the practitioner side, we are not a funding organization, but rather we receive funding and we have partners like Biovision Foundation. And basically, I wanted to contribute on the opportunities that pop up once there is this small share of funding that comes towards agroecology, especially in Africa, and that we are able to make a significant and meaningful transformation of the farming system, but also to influence the policies in our countries and in the continent. And in particular, for us as Sustainable Agriculture Tanzania, since 2009, we have been working on agroecology and have been engaging farmers. We have a network of over 10,000 farmers that we work with directly, and also some pastoralists. And we see that we are able to carry out demand-driven research on agroecology. And this came as a result of, first, in 2012, we carried out a survey in the country and we looked at all the research that was done in Tanzania. And we were quite surprised that there was less than 100 research works that were done in the countries in a period of 10 years. So it was a very big eye-opener for us that actually there's not so much effort, not so much funding, and not so much work is done on research on agroecology. And for agroecology to be socially, economically, and environmentally viable, we need to invest in research, also to make it better, but also to validate some practices that are recommended maybe from other parts. One has to invest in research to try in their local area to see if they work or how they can further improve on these practices, but also in new and emerging diseases and pests where research is needed to find solutions that are environmentally friendly and fit in the agroecological context. So about 6 years ago, we decided that we will invest our time, and we got on board some collaborators from Sokoine University of Agriculture, and with the support of Biovision Foundation and some other organizations, we are able to carry out research. For example, we had work on the fall armyworm, which was like a new pest, and we could come up with different findings and recommendations on using neem-based extracts on the management of fall armyworms. And this was taken up by farmers in our movement and also across the country and also beyond. And this one research, for example, and the realization and the findings which were able to be used by farmers to control fall armyworm in the maize was quite significant. And if you ask us how much financial resources were spent or invested in carrying out this research together with farmers, you'll see that it was not as much as the efforts that were used to hire the aeroplanes that went on doing aerial spraying, and still it was not possible to really successfully combat the problem until now, where we say, okay, the fall armyworm is not really talked about so much anymore, but we saw that the efforts that were put and the type of research that everybody went to on conventional agriculture and conventional means to control the fall armyworm were like very expensive, but the outcome was not so significant because still the challenge of the fall armyworm persisted for quite a long time, and farmers were not really able to find to benefit with the solutions that were put in place. But for us here, we really could see the agroecological farmers who had intercropped fields And the intercropping, the different intercropping systems, for example, those with pigeon peas, but also farmers who did push-pull in Kenya that I saw around that time when the fall armyworm outbreak was at the peak, really could benefit and could reduce the infestation of the fall armyworm in their crops, and they were better off compared to their conventional counterparts. So what I want to say is that if governments, if development partners, if donors here, you know, there is the EU Commission, also the SDC Global Program Food Security that fortunately is supporting the Ecological Organic Agriculture Initiative. And if we have more organizations and partners coming on board and supporting agroecology, it means we are able to work together, but also get farmers and carry out demand-driven research with farmers at the center on agroecology and find out solutions which are socially, economically, and environmentally viable and sustainable in that regard for the betterment of farming, but also for consumption and also improving on the nutrition, because with agroecological systems, we have diversity and the systems are resilient, and it's what we need in the 21st century. And after all, the food is finally healthy with less contamination and no synthetic residues or agrochemicals. So this is what we should be promoting and financing. And because we know the small amount, it's something where you put a small amount, but the benefit and the impact is significant. So if you put $10,000 in agroecology, the benefit is so significant. And this benefit is not for one company or one multinational organization. This is a benefit for the community. It's a benefit for small-scale farmers. It's a benefit for everyone, and it does better for the planet and the world. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Janet, to focusing on the return on investment from participatory research involving the farmers in agroecology. So thank you very much for that perspective. I will now ask Joshua to give his perspective.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'll pick it up from where Janet left. I think one, for us to be able to appreciate the current situation as far as funding to agriculture is concerned, we need indeed to reflect on the challenges that are available, and some of them have already been mentioned. One of the things I find very challenging is working in silos. Initially, this used to be a problem here, I would attribute it to government, but it so happens that many of the agroecology actors seem to work in silos, seem to work in isolation. And it's often difficult because agroecology is multidisciplinary. It's often difficult to find an institution that handles all the aspects, all the elements of agroecology. So that within itself, and at the same time, it's also it's quite difficult to find a project, a call for proposal that will be responsive to all the 10 elements of agroecology, for instance. So it means that we need to find ways of breaking the silos, first of all, working together. But then again, for you to do that, you need a broader framework. You need a multidisciplinary framework for, first of all, contextualizing agroecology, knowing how the different bits and pieces fit together into agroecological transformation of the food and the farming systems. So we also, of course, the issue of short funding has also been mentioned, and it's indeed a big problem that when you're talking about redesigning systems, even if they're talking about farming systems, you're talking about quite a longer period of time. So such a funding landscape that's looking at about 3 to 5 years, actually 5 years is quite a good time. In many cases, most of the calls are 2 to 3 years. It becomes quite difficult. But then in that case, it means that you need to be, as the project implementing partners, as the NGOs, as the agroecology actors, we need to be mindful of how the different small pieces can build onto one another. So some of this work, the foundation needs to be built very much before we start even applying for some of these, responding to some of these calls. Otherwise, we'll head into what has been said. You know, the more of a short-term gains, you know, making agroecology looking at more short-term things which can easily be
You're breaking up, Joshua.
Be changed. So I want to talk briefly about the guided earlier. I think is first of all is the growing evidence of the gaps that are within the current business as usual. I would say the evidence against conventional agriculture.
Joshua, you are breaking up.
So sorry, let me switch off the video. Maybe it's the problem.
Yeah, please. And if you can conclude fairly rapidly, because we are getting a bit behind schedule and we still have a lot of interventions expected. Hello? Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, but please, can you conclude?
All right, yeah, so briefly, I was saying that one is the evidence that is against the conventional way of doing of business as usual, which we can build on to capitalize. The recent pandemic, the COVID-19, the global crisis rather, has really showed that the current food system, as is, really can't respond to challenges, the complex challenges that we have. So really we can build a strong case for agroecology in that line. Then the other area I'm looking at is, of course, the climate financing. There is a lot of potential in agroecology towards building resilience towards of smallholder farmers to climate change effects, but also contributing to mitigation. So we can really build onto that opportunity. And then, of course, climate financing is also quite big, but the issue is how do we position ourselves on tapping into some of these resources. And then one thing that we are finding very useful as Uganda is the Scaling Up Agroecology Initiative, which was, of course, launched by the FAO. We are really building upon this. We've had so far 2 national agroecology symposiums, really trying to discuss ways in which we can scale up agroecology. And currently we are working on developing a national strategy for scaling up agroecology. We believe once this is in place, and we're working with the Ministry of Agriculture to see how this agroecology can be mainstreamed. And once that happens, as we've seen in the studies, most of the financing is coming directly to governments. So we believe once agroecology is taken up as a national strategy, it will most likely get some additional financing. So maybe let me leave it at this for the time being.
Thank you very much, Joshua. I will now turn to the donors that are among the panelists. And I will first give the floor to Christina and ask, given what you've heard today, can you speak to the opportunities that you see within your donor organization to shift financing towards transformative agroecological transformation?
Thank you, Emil, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words. On the opportunities, I think from our side, the evidence, as it was mentioned in the presentation before, but also as you mentioned in your presentation, Emil, the evidence that is available, evidence by the IPBS, by IPCC, this kind of reports, they help us to build a narrative to convince also other peoples, other divisions in our organization, in the government, that there is a need for a shift, for transformation, and that agroecology, which is also mentioned in these reports, is one way how this transformation could be achieved. On the other side, also the work done by FAO, the 10 elements, the HLP reports at the 13 principles, they give more clarity on what we are talking about. And if we want to increase the funding, we also need to convince other people. And with having this material, this information, it's much easier to explain what agroecology is about, and also to discuss all the different other approaches. And there, it seems that they become more and more. And it's also important to have this definition, or this, it's not a definition of agroecology, but it's rather a description, but also to discuss other approaches which might fail in on the social issues, on power issues, on governance issues. And there seems to be also from other areas, they try to maybe to greenwash their approaches, to sell them as agroecology. In that sense, it's quite helpful to have all this solid work. And what we did as a next step, say, well, when we want to do more on agroecology, we need to know how much of agroecology we already do in our portfolio. And I don't talk about the portfolio that was mentioned in the presentation before, the research portfolio. I only talk about our portfolio, which is about 30 million. It's Global Program Food Security, so it's not whole SDC. But as a first step, we developed a tool to measure agroecology in our portfolio. The tool reflects what we consider as agroecological, and I think that was important or interesting to see. We have had 6 different presentations. I think most of them used different tools and methodology to define what is agroecology, or how much of the portfolio budget is agroecological. And in that sense, we set a baseline. It's less than 20%, and we set a goal in 4 years. It's about to have more than 50%. And now we have to work. And if it works, also to spread the message within SDC that the whole SDC food security portfolio turns more towards agroecology, but also within Switzerland, within the whole government, where other actors are quite important, because we talk here about 30 million. But when we look what happens with World Bank, with it was the study on IFED and all such big actors, there is a lot more to do. And I think it's step by step, sometimes starting below 0, sometimes a little bit higher. But it's good also to have a lot of, or a growing community walking into the same direction. I close with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina, on this positive note, encouraging note at the end. So I will now ask Christophe to answer that question about opportunities to shift funding towards agroecological transformation.
Thank you. Thank you, Emil, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I need to start by thanking you, of course, for the opportunity to participate in this webinar. It's very informative, of course, and the diversity of speakers is in itself a very important aspect of the discussion of today. I would like to say that the work that has been done on funding landscapes is a very interesting one. I see, however, a few limits, and it's about the comparability that Christina just mentioned, about methodologies and period covered. So, of course, they have been done like that, no issue. But I think it would be interesting that you reflect on all these studies and look at the different methodologies and what do they tell exactly, because they may tell individually something, but overall, what do they tell? It may be a different story. I need, of course, to intervene on the result of the study that concerned our funding to Rome-based agencies. So thank you for spotting some limitations of what this study covered. We have had a very extensive dialogue with Nina on this work, and we have very much appreciated the robustness of the work and the methodology that has been followed. But we also highlighted a number of limitations that are, I would say, clearly mentioned in the report, not so much in the leaflet, but in the report, the limitations are very clearly spelled out. I don't want to spend too much time today on that because it's not the purpose of the meeting, but of course it's a limited and very limited representation of our portfolio through Rome-based agencies, through the budget. It doesn't take into account another big important funding mechanisms at the EU level, which is the European Development Fund. It covers payments of a very short period of time. So it doesn't capture as such what we think is taking shape in terms of changes in our portfolio in agriculture, more recent changes. So a few limitations that, of course, needs always some caveats in the way the results are presented. And also, and we have had quite frank discussions with Nina on, on the definition and how the application of the different scale of the Glisman approach was applied to the portfolio. So fair enough. But really, we welcome this work, and because it's very useful for us also to reflect and to see how we can equip ourselves on the agroecological transition agenda a bit clearer, and also be better equipped to measure what we are doing exactly there. So coming back more concretely to the question that you asked, Emil, I think there is something that we shouldn't put aside. It's how the countries themselves are defining their priorities, because that's how most of the donors also align the bulk of their cooperation programs. So it's important to look at what donors are doing, but it's also important that there is a work to be done at country level on the agenda of these countries. And now some which are pushing the agroecological agenda quite strongly are doing more concretely through the use of their own public resources. So there, I think there is an element that may be better looked at from the kind of work that is being done. From the EU side, of course, we have quite a major political shift in terms of political priorities with the Green Deal, with the Farm to Fork strategy, with the biodiversity strategy. And we hope and we think that it's going to make the way we interact with the rest of the world a bit different. Of course, it has a very strong European focus, but it will have some impacts on the way we interact with the rest of the world and the way we frame our programs. Will it be enough to satisfy the broadest definition of agroecology? I'm not sure. Okay, but I think that a number of changes can happen, and we already see that in the way EU delegations, in our case, are coming with very early ideas of work for the future programming cycle of our cooperation programs for the period 2021-2027, where words, references are coming much more than what we would have seen in the past. That's quite clear. So from our side, what we try to do, of course, we have different roles on the agroecological agenda. Okay, we have we recognize the different dimensions of agroecology as a science movement, as a social movement, as a set of practices. We are ourselves a public institution, and we have to look at issues with different kind of constraints. So what we are working on ourselves is to start really reflections on how we can look at ways of better articulating agroecology and the innovation agenda? How can we better frame our views on agroecology and performances? The role of chemicals. Okay, we can have different views on that, but what does it mean also in some practical ways of looking at agroecology? So we would like ourselves to look quite deeply, as much as we can, on these sensitive issues, and then to see how we can frame that in our support to the countries through the way we support research activities and research themes, the way we look at the role of extension services and the kind of messages and the work they are doing themselves for the farmers, how we can link that to our support to value chain development and the articulation with the private sector. It's not easy, as we know. There are some risks, but we have to see how far we can go. To look at the connections between nutrition and agroecological practices, and I will certainly have a look at the document that has been shared in the discussion, and how we can accompany the improvement of public policies. Things are changing. Things are changing. Maybe not at the scale, at the path that some people would like to see. But we are involved in some regions of the world on policy discussions. In Western Africa, we are not alone with some EU member states. We are working there quite closely. We have a set of actions that are going to be implemented in the coming months in a number of countries that are really putting and using at least the notion of agroecological approaches as key element of them. So things are moving. We of course have to keep track of that, to have proper tools to measure, and what our colleagues from Switzerland have done is an interesting way to look at to do it, and we ourselves will do that in the coming months and years. And I would like simply to underline that we try to see how we can work differently with farmers' organizations to give them a stronger role in the research agenda, but also themselves to develop some forms of research that is speaking to the needs of their members. We are supporting a number of research organizations that are pushing some of this more integrated approach. And there was some reference to the push-pull technology. We have been a long-standing partner of ECP in Kenya on this, including on fall armyworm. So it's also for us how to better communicate on what we are doing. There is no doubt about it, but certainly also to see how alliances with different kind of actors can be done, and how we can value what is taking shape in some global south countries to serve as example, because it's not up to donors or the Europeans to tell the rest of the world that's what you have to do, when ourselves, we may go a bit further and quicker. So it's really how can we look at alliances and push with different tools, make use of different opportunities, and find common grounds. Because of course I can hear the very substantial contribution of today, and this is highly respectable. But we know that in life, it's often quite different. So how can we help to shake and move the agenda without undermining core principles that, of course, have to be there? Thank you, Emile and colleagues.
Thank you very much, Christophe. We have about 15 minutes left on our agenda, or maybe 5 more minutes if we recuperate the late start. Before I pass on to the next question, I just want to mention, Christophe, you mentioned the differences in methodologies that have been used in different studies. There is a plan to have a workshop among the people that are involved in these kind of studies to see how they can harmonize methodology so that we can better compare the outcome of different studies. And that's being planned for the early months of 2021. But I'd like to ask a last question to the panelists before we close. And this is about what you've heard about this bigger picture and what's happening with efforts to either water down agroecology to just some simple elements, or co-optation of the terminology, and also looking at how other investments in non-agroecology can actually undermine efforts to develop agroecology. So that general broader picture, how can we move forward, and what needs to be done to overcome these obstacles that were mentioned in this, looking at this bigger picture. So I'd like to ask, first starting with the two donors, what do you see that needs to be done to overcome these big picture issues in order to really begin building this new paradigm? And maybe I'll start again with Christina. If we can just have a short comment on that to stay in time.
Thank you, Emil. I try to be short. What I think what is needed, and even if I mentioned in my intervention before that we have a lot of evidence, there is still a lot of evidence missing. And what I believe it's important is we need to move forward on true cost accounting. That might create arguments that other actors in the wider agricultural scene also might better understand, if we can have better also economic value on social issues, but also on environmental issues. And that might help to sensitize more, to create more awareness in order to build a broader or to increase the community where we can move forward together. And I think what is equally important is to have abroad the society. We need to have the consumers as quite a strong part of stakeholders. There are many that might help to create a critical mass in order to increase also pressure that there is a need to move, and maybe also to speed up a little bit. But also what was mentioned before by Christoph, I think it's, even if we do not have the speed we would like to have, that's true. But on the other side, at least the last couple of years, it speeded up. So there is a movement, there are activities, and the pressure might also increase, and that might help to create more evidence in order to transform our food systems. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. Christoph, can I ask you to comment on that question about what can be done to overcome these bigger picture issues?
Yeah, thank you, Emil. And I will start by saying that I like a lot, Emil, your slide that shows on one side the conventional agriculture, on the other side subsistence agriculture, and this kind of path towards diversified farming systems. For me, this is the only way that we can have some forms of convincing message on agroecology, because it is, we have to collectively to demonstrate that agroecology is, if we want to contribute to the transformation of the system, that it is modern, okay? That it is modern, that it can use some forms of technologies, that it's not feeding this feeling or that it is something that is keeping people in dire situation. I think this is something that has to be framed, certainly, because it can't be done at all costs in terms of principles. But that's what I tried to say earlier. We would like ourselves, to look at it, what does it mean to look at genetics and agroecology? Sorry, maybe it may not be so well received by some people in the webinar, but the discussion should be open on that. What does it mean to use the digital tools for what and how, of course. But we need to have this kind of discourse. Because we think that it is one element that can help to go faster and further. When you hear some leaders in Africa from development banks and so on, we have also to realize that our agenda, the agenda on agroecology, doesn't seem very high in their priorities. So it's how we can, not pragmatically, but at least from our side, from a partner with these countries, how can we find the best hooks to move and to help the actors that really are engaged, of course, on these issues. So that's really for us the one way to help agroecological approaches as tool for transformation of food systems. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that brings me to one comment. You mentioned that this issue about innovation, and this is a question that I've been asked on many occasions. What do we really mean by agroecology? What does it mean? And some people have been using this image that it is looking back rather than looking forward. And my answer has been that agroecology is really looking at all the innovation options. It is very knowledge intensive, and it's looking at all the innovation options that are compatible with the 10 elements of agroecology, or the 13 principles as they are described in the high-level panel of experts report. So it is not has an a priori for particular aspects. It's really looking at what is compatible with these principles, because these are what should be guiding our efforts in agroecology. But without further ado, I will now ask the three other panelists to answer that same question, what they see that needs to be done to change that bigger picture, and starting with Mamadou.
I had some challenge to hear the last part of what you said. It was a bit cut, the last part.
So I just want to have a brief statement from you. What do you think needs to be done to overcome these bigger picture issues of cooperation, watering down, and other obstacles to transformation?
Yeah, for me, 2 or 3 things. The first one is that we need really to reform the funding structures, including all the other financial sources that are used for supporting agroecology. So this means that there is a way of working together in a synergical way so that all segments of agroecology are addressed at the same time, because agroecology is a whole. There is an upstream and there is a downstream. So this is the first thing. Second thing that I will propose is just to have this multi-stakeholders platform that are spaces for dialogue, so that we can understand each other, because the dialogue sometimes is completely blocked because of the lack of empathy between donors and recipients sometimes, but also those who are in between. Because we all know that for a very long-standing structural way of addressing this issue, there is a need to have the public funding system included in the process. Thirdly, I would say very simply, just listen to us. Listen to what we think are the orientation of this agroecological perspective in our countries and our regions, and then we are organizing ourselves. We have different layers of organizational backgrounds. We have some networks like 3AO in West Africa. That is a channel, for instance, of understanding some of the key challenges behind what we are doing. So listen to us, and then I'm sure that we can just come with some clear picture of where to go further in this issue. So the different segment will be addressed in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet, I ask you to make some brief comments on this?
Yes, thank you, Emil. I'm not very far from Mamadou, and I'll just add up a few points. So you see, agroecology is a grassroots. It's really from the bottom up, and so I believe kind of get through some of these bottlenecks, we need to, of course, for us in the grassroots, we have to work to keep on doing a good work, because I believe something good sells itself. So we keep on doing the good work, and this good work will be seen, and it will entice and attract people, and it will make people say, oh yes, they're right, this is the way, this is how we should be going, especially in times like this where it's quite challenging also with the issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, and where we've seen that again, here in Tanzania, we had a lot of herbs and spices that we were encouraged to use, and so people started asking for plants which normally nobody used to talk about anymore. So we should not wait for such times where we have pandemics to invest in good eating, producing healthy crops, and some of these traditional crops which are known to be medicinal, for example. And we need to have policies that favor and support agroecology, but that's not enough. We need to have strategies and budget allocations also from our governments for agroecology, and it should be there because they see that agroecology is a way towards ensuring sustainability, ensuring equitable incomes for people. It's a good source of livelihood and development of a country. And also, there should be platforms. We should encourage to have platforms where we share the experiences, the challenges and opportunities in agroecology locally within countries, but also regionally and globally, because I believe there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on agroecological research for it to be to find out solutions and to also further scale it up. And there's a lot of learning that still needs to take place for us all, and we can only benefit by having opportunities for sharing and exchanging locally, but also globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think these are nice words to conclude this panel. So since time is over in a minute or so, or a few minutes, I will just say a few closing remarks to close this webinar. I think what we have heard from various speakers is that although there is still a long way to go, things have been moving in the right direction in the last couple of years. There is an increasing interest in agroecology, things that were not there 2 or 3 years ago. You hear more and more of a real interest in agroecology. But we also need to be aware of increasing efforts to, on the way, undermine agroecology by watering down, co-optation of the terminology, also questioning its ability to still achieve the objectives. We must overcome this claimed negative image of agroecology, where people are saying that it's looking backwards, it's not progressive. And I think we must really give that image that agroecology is knowledge intensive, and the importance of co-innovation between researchers and farmers as an important element of agroecology. I think a clear message is also the need to revisit the funding mechanisms to better be adapted to the needs of agroecology, which is a longer term transformation that cannot be achieved by just short-term projects allocated on a competitive basis. And also that we need to convince governments, because indeed a lot of the development aid is of course primarily responding to needs expressed by governments of developing countries. And therefore we must also engage in convincing them of the opportunities that are brought by agroecology, and also of the negative impact of conventional or industrial model of agriculture. I think that climate change, the environmental damage are very strong justifications to call for this rapid transformation. And I would say the COVID-19 situation has even made this the justification for transformation stronger and more urgent. So I'm not trying to recap everything that has been said during this rich discussion. I want to thank all the organizers, first of all, for putting this together, all the participants for joining us. You were quite numerous, I've seen. And a very special thank to the speakers and panelists for their contribution. I hope that this is really be a step in a process of engagement to get us more solidly established on the route towards sustainable, resilient food systems. With that, I thank you all, and I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.